Most days don't feel dramatic. They feel full. You wake up with a list already forming in your mind, messages to answer, tasks waiting, responsibilities already in motion. Before the day has properly started, attention is already being spent. You move from one thing to the next. Work, communication, small obligations that feel harmless on their own. You respond, you adjust, you keep things moving. And from the outside, it looks like a productive life. But there's a quiet feeling that appears later, usually in the evening, sometimes when everything finally slows down. A sense that the day was used, but not lived. That effort was expended, but nothing truly settled. Nothing went wrong. You did what you were supposed to do. You stayed busy. You stayed responsive. You stayed engaged. And yet, something feels unfinished. Not a specific task, something deeper. This video is about that feeling, not as a personal failure, not as a lack of discipline or gratitude, but as the result of living inside systems that are very good at keeping life full, while quietly draining it of completion. By the end of this video, you'll understand why doing everything right can still leave life feeling strangely empty, and why that feeling isn't coming from you. At some point, most people learned a quiet rule about life, that staying busy was a sign of progress, that full schedules meant forward movement, that productivity was proof of responsibility. This wasn't taught in one conversation. It was absorbed. You saw it in how work was praised, in how effort was rewarded, in how idleness was treated with suspicion. Being occupied meant being useful. Being useful meant being valued. And over time, those ideas fused together. Productivity became more than a tool. It became a moral signal. If you were busy, you were doing something right. If you were overwhelmed, it meant you were important. If you were tired, it meant you were contributing. And if you weren't busy, something felt wrong. This belief didn't come from nowhere. It was reinforced everywhere. Schools rewarded constant output. Workplaces praised responsiveness. Technology promised to help you do more, faster. Each improvement carried the same message: efficiency leads to a better life. And for a while, that promise felt true. Life became smoother. Tasks became easier to manage. Information became instantly accessible. The problem wasn't productivity itself. The problem was what quietly disappeared as productivity increased. Because productivity measures activity, not direction, not meaning, not completion. And once life begins to organize itself around activity alone, something subtle milestones. You start doing more without ever feeling finished. At first, productivity was personal. You decided what mattered. You decided when something was done. You decided whether effort felt worthwhile. But as life became more complex, something changed. Productivity stopped being something you felt and became something you could measure. Metrics entered quietly. Deadlines, targets, benchmarks, performance indicators. They were meant to help. They offered clarity. They made work legible. They allowed large systems to function. But they also did something else. They shifted authority. When productivity became measurable, judgment moved outward. Completion was no longer defined by satisfaction. It was defined by numbers, response times, output volume, availability, visibility. You didn't ask, "Does this feel finished?" You asked, "Does this meet the requirement?" And requirements have a strange property. They can always be raised. Once a system learns what you can handle, it adjusts its expectations. Faster replies become normal. Longer hours become invisible. Higher output becomes assumed. What once felt exceptional slowly becomes the baseline. This is where life begins to feel busy but thin, because metrics are good at tracking motion, but blind to meaning. They measure how much, how fast, how often. They do not measure why. Over time, people adapt. They learn to optimize for visibility instead of value. They learn to stay responsive instead of reflective. They learn to keep things moving instead of bringing them to a close. And without noticing it happening, the feeling of completion begins to disappear. Not because people stopped caring, but because the systems they live inside stopped recognizing it. At some point, something strange begins to happen. Stillness stops feeling peaceful. Moments without input start to feel uncomfortable. Silence feels unfinished. Pauses feel like something is being missed. Not because anything is wrong, but because nothing is happening. This isn't natural. For most of human history, stillness meant safety. It meant rest after effort. It meant time to recover. It meant space for thought. But inside modern systems, stillness sends a different signal. When productivity is measured, inactivity looks like absence. When responsiveness is rewarded, unavailability looks like failure. So even when nothing is demanded, the pressure remains. Internalized. You don't rest because you're tired. You rest because everything else has finally stopped asking. And modern systems are designed to make sure something is always asking. A message waiting, a task unfinished, a metric updating, a notification arriving. Each one small, none of them urgent on their own. Together, they create a constant background tension. Over time, this changes how people relate to themselves. Rest begins to require justification. Pauses feel irresponsible. Unstructured time feels wasteful. So people stay occupied, not because they need to, but because stopping feels risky. This is where busyness becomes self-sustaining. The system no longer needs to push. People keep themselves moving, and the more they do, the harder stillness becomes to return to. At this point, it's reasonable to ask a difficult question. If constant motion leaves people tired, distracted, and unsatisfied, why does modern life seem to demand it? The answer isn't a secret group or hidden agenda. It's something much simpler. Incentives. Modern systems are built to handle scale. Millions of people, endless information, continuous demand. To function at that scale, systems must reduce uncertainty. They do this by encouraging predictability, and predictability comes from motion. A person who is constantly active is easier to anticipate. They respond quickly. They adapt continuously. They rarely stop long enough to question structure. From a systems perspective, constant engagement looks like stability.
I understand the issue.
This is why so many
According to the
systems
dashboard,
reward
the
availability.
service request is currently
Emails
being
expect
processed.
fast replies.
Your wait time is
Platforms
approximately 4
reward
minutes.
frequent interaction. Workplaces praise responsiveness. Not because speed is always better, but because speed keeps things moving. Completion is unpredictable. When something ends, attention disengages. When attention disengages, systems lose momentum. So systems evolve to delay endings, to extend processes, to refresh tasks, to keep goals slightly out of reach. Not maliciously, automatically. This is what optimization looks like. Not control, not force, but continuous motion that never quite resolves. And once a system is optimized this way, slowing it down feels like damage. So people adapt. They learn to stay reachable. They learn to stay busy. They learn to keep things open. Not because anyone told them to, but because the system quietly rewards it. Living this way doesn't break people immediately. That's important to understand. It wears them down slowly, quietly. At first, constant activity feels manageable. You adapt, you adjust. You tell yourself this is just how modern life works. Days fill up, weeks pass, tasks get completed, but something subtle begins to change. People start losing a clear sense of progress, not externally, but internally. You might look back on a week and struggle to say what actually mattered. You were busy, but busy with what exactly? This is where the emptiness begins. Not because life lacks meaning, but because meaning requires endings, moments where something feels complete, where effort settles, where attention can rest. Without those moments, experience blurs. Over time, identity starts to shift. People stop asking, "What do I want to finish?" They start asking, "What needs attention next?" Life becomes a sequence of responses instead of a sequence of choices. This affects how people see themselves. Accomplishment feels temporary. Satisfaction feels delayed. Rest feels undeserved. Even meaningful work begins to feel hollow when it never truly ends. And because nothing is visibly wrong, people assume the problem is personal. They try harder, optimize themselves, improve habits. But effort alone can't fix a life without completion. The result isn't burnout, it's something quieter, a persistent sense of being unfinished. Modern life doesn't ask whether you feel complete. It asks whether you're still moving, whether you're reachable, whether you're responsive, whether you're engaged. And most people are. From the outside, this looks like success. Full calendars, active inboxes, constant momentum. But from the inside, it often feels different. Like life is happening around you, while you keep pace. The systems you live inside don't need to trap you. They only need to keep you occupied. Because when attention is always directed outward, there is little space left to notice what's missing. Not things. Endings. Completion doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive through notifications. It isn't measured by metrics. It isn't rewarded by systems built for motion. It's felt quietly, when effort settles, when attention rests, when something finally feels done. And if those moments are rare, life can feel full, yet strangely empty. So the question isn't whether you're productive, it's whether your life contains things that are allowed to truly end. Moments you can carry with you instead of leaving behind. Because a life spent moving can still feel unfinished. And once you notice that difference, it becomes difficult to stop noticing it.